Welcome to the Savvy Luminary podcast, Astrology for Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Leslie Tagorda, creator of the Astrobrand Method, business astrologer, brand designer, author, and Aquarius boss woman. I help visionary spiritual entrepreneurs and impact makers like you illuminate and amplify your unique star powers so you can be the luminary you were born to be. Well, welcome, luminaries. I have such a special edition of the Savvy Luminary this week. We have a panel of extra special astrology witches, experts, just wonderful goddesses that I am so grateful to know through the Savvy Luminary group. Today, we'll be sharing different aspects of the house systems and talking with each of these astrologers and how they use astrology in their business and discussing different house systems that we each individually use. So let's get started. Are y'all ready?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce everybody or let them introduce themselves.
So I am Sara McCormick and I own Bella de Luna. And what I do is I consider myself a writer kind of first and foremost, but also a soul care or self-care astrologer, where my goal is just to help people use astrology to find themselves. There's a lot of avenues that takes, but my kind of view is we all have our own unique inner light, and my kind of goal in life is to help people find their light.
Beautiful. And oh my gosh, Sarah's planner, her soul care planner is just so gorgeous. I absolutely love it. And how do you use, I mean, obviously you are an astrologer, but do you use astrology in a specific way in your business?
Constantly, yes.
Every aspect.
Yes. It's not even just my business, it's also my life and kind of my personal self-care or soul care. I really try to, things happen, part of our schedule's not in our control. So we can't plan everything according to astrology, but it really does give me comfort to be able to kind of use the moon and the moon phases as guidance for planning my day. So right now with the moon being in Taurus, just slowing down, spending time in nature, kind of indulging in like my five senses. I try to use that to give me some kind of guidance throughout my days and weeks, just so it gives me space and permission to connect with myself in a way that I haven't found otherwise. And so I really love using astrology like that.
Such a beautiful way to kind of structure our lives. And today, yes, the moon is in Taurus and Venus just moved into Taurus just a few minutes ago. Isn't that great? I feel just kind of that lovey-dovey, just everything feels, I wanted to wear some bright colors today. It feels just so lovely. Jill, will you please introduce yourself to all of us?
Sure. I'm Jill Jablonski, and I'm a certified spiritual life coach. My business is Soul Spark Healing and Guidance, and I focus on helping empaths like myself to kind of get back to who they are, sort of get away from some of the people pleasing and sacrificing behaviors that we tend to let kind of take us off track. And use astrology to help my clients get back to kind of who they really are, who they've forgotten that they were, and to kind of peel back those layers that have kind of piled on throughout life to remind them who they are at the soul level.
Beautiful. So you and Sara have that in common with just kind of shining the light on what does our soul need. And so how do you use astrology in your life and business?
When I have a coaching client, one of the first things that we do is look at their astrology chart. And it really helps to explain to them a lot of the things that they've experienced through their life, a lot of the lessons that they've had to go through, so that it gives meaning to their experiences, and then they can look at it as more of a lesson, something that they can glean something positive from, even if it was a more challenging situation. And then they can sort of take that forward and use what they've learned through those lessons to sort of get them back on their soul path, and use it to help motivate them towards their destiny rather than just succumbing to their fate.
Great. So you're also using astrology kind of throughout all of your coaching, everything that you do.
Yes, definitely.
I love that. And Hana, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Will you introduce? You have a very unique perspective also on astrology and how you use it. I see your hula hoops in the background.
Yes, so hula hooping and astrology, somebody probably would be like, what is the connection? Why did you choose to use hula hoops to integrate astrology, to connect astrology? And I really love the idea of astrology being embodied in our lives and everything we do, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the music we listen to, and how we can make it, the magic of astrology, just real. And that is through physical activity, through physical movement. And I know people have made the connection between astrology and yoga, and they've made the connection between astrology and the chakra systems. So I know that there's this extra step we can take with hula hoop. And of course, the hula hoop is a beautiful symbol of the chart. I mean, if you use a circular chart, then you can use a hula hoop to embody that chart. So I do a lot of work with kind of magical correlations. I use the hula hoop as a chart to, put little, you can use crystals, you can use candles, you can use herbs, anything that's associated, all of the different correspondences between the different astrological signs of the planets and then the houses. So it's just a wonderful way to just incorporate everything in our lives to really make astrology real, something tangible for us. So that's what I do. I give readings as well, but I really love helping people find that magical power planet in their chart so they can start embodying it and really feeling empowered by that. So kind of in a nutshell what I do. It's a little out there, but that's me.
That's great. Well, even thinking about the hula hoop and in that process, I'm a terrible hula hooper, by the way. I can never keep it going. But just thinking of just the orbits also, right? And how each of the planets, as they move around, they're all at different speeds, at different velocities. Even the orbits are not always exactly circular and they kind of tilt. So it's just such this wonderful visual about like, okay, how do you embody the astrological chart? Because I think at least part of what I hope that people start, as they start to know the cosmic weather, that they start to live and start to feel and start to notice these little changes in seasons and planetary energies. And I love the visual and the understanding that your body would get from hula hoops as being kind of the center of all of those different orbits. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. And orbital astrology is the name of my business. So, so yes, the orbit is really the key idea behind everything. And even, if you look at your chart, putting yourself in the center of it, I love to do kind of like writing activities or drawing activities where you put you draw yourself in the center of the chart, and it's that ring that's around you. And the same with the hula hoop, you are Saturn in the middle and that ring is around you. And it's just a wonderful way to play with that and feel it.
Wonderful. I think when we were trying to connect earlier, we were trying to connect over this idea of like the creative process. Yes. And unlocking the creative process using astrology. Is that primarily what you do with clients through astrology?
Well, what I am developing right now is the concept of astro flow. And so, yes, that flow is really the key to creativity. It's the key to natural high. It's the euphoric place that you get to when you sort of lose yourself in complete focus in whatever you're doing. And so that creative process is really key to that. And hula hooping is definitely one way you can get into that flow, because the word flow is just, it's in so many different industries and so many different areas of life, but most hula hoopers consider themselves flow artists. And so, yeah, it's really, depending on what type of creativity you want to pursue, some people feel like they can't draw or they can't write or they can't do something, but just whatever area that they are comfortable in or whatever they have this desire to pursue, then that's where I help them look into their chart. A lot of times people don't know what their, creative process would be like if they have never really experienced or have an opportunity to. So we look at that area of their chart and sort of give them an opportunity to get into the flow in that area.
Oh, that is so wonderful. So, and then, I mean, mostly everybody here listening to the Savvy Luminary knows who I am, obviously, but I just wanted to kind of point out kind of just where the similarities intersect in terms of how we are all using astrology to gain more insight into our own beings as well as our customers' beings, and like really shining the light on what are we here to supposed to do, not what are we here to should do. Rather, I don't think that was exactly grammatical, but I think grammatical, but I think you understood. So wonderful. Thank you again. We created this kind of panel today because I posted something on my Facebook group, The Savvy Luminary, looking for other astrologers who used different house systems and to have a conversation about house systems. And so before we dive into how each of you use the house systems in your business, I wanted to kind of go through what is a house system for those of us who might not yet know what the house systems are. Do any of you want to add some insight as to what a house system means to you?
I like the house systems, or the way the chart is broken up into the 12 different houses, and how obviously they align with the 12 different signs, but they're completely different. So I really love the fact that the house systems are a way of dividing up the sky. And that connection between the earth and the sky is really beautiful. And how many different types of house systems there is indicative of how many different ways we can look at the sky and the relationship between the earth and the sky. And in the chart, it's great because you can see that the house systems are opposite of the planets, the motion of the planets. So the planets are going in one direction, the diurnal motion, and then the houses are going in the opposite direction. There's this dynamic element that the houses bring to the chart. So that's what I personally love about them. And they represent the different areas of your life. So if someone else wants to go into that a little bit deeper, I don't want to just talk over everyone, but yeah, that's what I love about it.
No worries. Jill, it looked like you had something to add.
I just love the extra information that you can get, from a planet being in a house system. If we didn't have a house system, if it was just all like one big circle, I think there would be a lot of information that we'd be missing about who someone is, at the soul level and why they came into this lifetime. I think, having the house systems, no matter which house system you use, just adds so much more information about who someone is at a soul level.
Yes, I completely agree. And then Sara, did you have anything that you wanted to add about the house systems and what they are?
The only thing I was thinking of adding, I'm very visual, so I tend to come up with visuals when I'm thinking. And to me, when I am usually showing a client their birth chart for the first time and I'm describing how it's broken up, I describe it as a pie. And then each house is a piece of the pie, but it's like a magical pie where each piece of the pie is a different type of pie.
Different flavors.
Yeah, it's because each part of the house is, it's a little different part of ourselves and who we are, but it's the whole pie that makes us up. And so that's kind of the fun part of exploring, like what's in your pie and how is it broken up.
I just love that visual where, yes, we have all these little individual pieces of the pie, and depending what house system you use, they might be different sizes, but that we are, in fact, the whole pie. So yeah, so to further clarify what these house systems are, if we're using a circular house system, as Hana mentioned, the house system is divided up into 12 pieces they look like pie across the starting point is that left horizon of the equator. So if you have a circle and you divide it in half by the equator, the very left point of the equator represents the eastern horizon at the time you were born, also known as your rising sign or your ascendant sign. So in order to create an accurate house system drawing or house division on your chart, you do need to know the time that you were born. And there's different types of house systems that we'll get into, but ultimately each of these house systems divides the chart into 12 different pieces. Sometimes they're even pieces, sometimes they're unequal pieces. And each of these pieces symbolizes an area in a place in your life, or of course, because I'm talking about business astrology, or your business. And there's different filters that you can place on these different houses, where a house will represent a type of person or a type of place in your life or a different part of your business. So if you've been listening for a while, we've been talking a lot about the first house lately in branding and our leadership abilities. So in business astrology, the first house would be about your brand visibility, your leadership, and how you present yourself into the world. But if we're looking at just traditional astrology, the first house when it relates to people is you, your body.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different types. Really, the reason why we came to talk today was to talk about these different types of house systems. And what that means is the different systems and how they divide this chart. I mentioned earlier that some of the house systems divide the chart into different sizes of pie slices, some equal, some unequal. But the one consistent thing that all of these house systems have is the rising sign, that leftmost point of that kind of equator cutoff point. From my understanding, there's kind of two groupings of house systems. One is the quadrant house system, and then one is kind of I don't know what it's called. Is it the sextant house system, where it's the equal, there's the whole sign houses and the equal houses where they just start off at the 30 degrees. But this is getting a little bit more technical. But basically, the quadrant systems, something like Placidus is the system that I use. Porphyry, which if you have the CoStar app uses the Porphyry system. And then there's Campanus and Cox systems. Basically, all of these systems divide a circular chart into 4 points, where we divide it first in half at the equator, and then again in half at, what's the opposite of the equator? The top down point. So where we have the MC, the midheaven at the very top, and then the IC at the very bottom. So thinking about dividing a circle into 4 equal parts, half and half. And then the quadrant systems will then place the different houses and fill in the blanks in between those 4 points. Whereas the whole sign and equal sign houses, they'll take your rising sign and they just divide the circle up by 12. So each piece of pie has 30 degrees. So for all of those who are kind of astro, techie, nerdy curious, that's kind of more the technical. But so I would love to know what house systems everyone uses in your business and why you choose to work with them.
I use Porphyry, and it's I had, when I was a baby astrologer, I did start out with Placidus, but then when I discovered Porphyry, it just seemed to resonate more for me, and so I started using it, and it's the main system that I use with all of my clients, and it just seems to resonate more for me as well as my clients. You know, they're always saying that, you know, oh yeah, that's exactly how I feel. That's exactly how I feel, you know. So so it's just always, it's been the one that has worked best for me in my work. And I feel like it's actually considered one of the more ancient house systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I've, you know, as I've been kind of thinking about that a little bit more, I feel like, you know, way back when, you know, people were starting to look at the stars and this, you know, this kind of stuff, we were more tuned into nature and cycles and things like that. back then. And I feel like you have to get tuned back into nature and cycles in order to get back in touch with your soul. And so I feel like that's really kind of the root of why porphyry kind of resonates for me and my clients specifically.
Yeah, so when you were looking, when you kind of were making that transition from Placidus to Porphyry, what were some of the things that did you notice that felt more resonant to you when you were looking at Porphyry versus Placidus?
So in my chart, when it's constructed with the Placidus house system, it places Pluto in my 8th house, and it also intercepts Leo and Aquarius. And so while I feel like, on a 3D level, a lot of that can apply. But when I looked at it in Porphyry and it placed Pluto in my 9th house and intercepted actually Virgo and Pisces, that actually resonated more for me as far as, soul lessons and things like that. So, it can, because the different house systems use different calculations, some of the planets can end up in different houses if they're, close enough to that house cusp, they might end up in a different house.
Well, and also it's really interesting about what you talked about, the interception. So for what interceptions are basically, if we look at the divisions of each of the houses, they're called cusps, and they're just like little lines that are drawn on the chart. And we can think of these as doorways into that area of our life. And so, for example, when Jill said that in Placidus, she had her polarity of the Leo Aquarius, without a cusp line, that means that she has to enter her Leo creativity and her Aquarius individuality through the doorway of the sign preceding it. So Cancer and Capricorn, that's what it is.
Okay.
Thank you. And so when you're thinking about Porphyry then, so do you feel that it's like your creativity isn't something that you're blocked in, but instead kind of that organization with, if we think about the now intercepted Virgo, is like to get organized, to get kind of in that analysis mode is a little bit more hidden for you than your creativity?
It's more of, for me, it's more the anxiety of Virgo, that it's more like the shadow aspects of Virgo that kind of prevent me from accessing that, organized, efficient energy.
Got it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So Jill uses Porphyry in her business, and you love it because of it feels more intuitive to you in terms of like the messages and the meanings that you're getting from the planet placements in different houses.
Yes, definitely.
So I use whole sign houses. And like Jill, like Placidus was what I learned first.
Mm-hmm.
But what I love about whole sign houses is I think because, like I've mentioned before, I'm very visual, I'm not going to remember where everything is in my birth chart based on degree, but I will remember what sign it's in.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy for me to kind of picture my birth chart or a client's birth chart in my mind and see how everything is connected and working together with whole sign houses, because basically each house is a sign when you come to with whole sign houses. And so it's for me, it's very visual, and that makes it easier for me to work with it. And also it's just fun to dive into like the history of all of the different house systems, because with whole sign houses, researchers kind of, when they've discovered, basically the records of astrology, whole sign houses dates back, thousands of years. And then somehow along the way it got lost a little bit, but I think it's becoming more popular again in the past, 30 or 40 years, which is it's fun to see how things change and shift and what's resonating with people. And I think it's, I agree with what Jill said about like, we tend to, sometimes with modern astrology, we kind of forget a little bit of what astrology was originally based off of, in terms of pulling in the cycles and the seasons and how they really are reflected in what's happening. And I think it's fun to kind of remember that and go back with that. I think that's a really good point Jill made. I think that's a lot of why, I think that's part of why astrology is starting to resonate with so many people in general now, is because it is a good reflection of that slowing down and kind of tuning into the world around you.
Definitely. There is definitely a renaissance of astrology. And even just from talking with just the four of us, how we all use astrology and have applied it so differently in our businesses. Going back to you, Sara, about the whole sign houses, I listen to Chris Brennan regularly in his astrology podcast, and he is a Hellenistic astrologer. So he does the deep research. His Saturn in the first house is all about that deep research, and his Aquarius rising, that deep research into those old traditions that need to kind of inform our modern traditions and kind of closing those gaps. And so it is true. I think porphyry was one of the first non-whole sign, equal sign house system, like quadrant systems created. I believe that is kind of the history of that. And so the whole sign houses go back even before porphyry. Again, there is no right or no wrong. I think, the ultimate, my hypothesis is that we all choose the house system that resonates the best with what we need.
Well, I just wanted to say that I am a huge Chris Brennan fan too. I met him at an astrology conference, and I was a little tipsy at the dinner night, and I was like, "You are the man. Thank you so much for all the stuff you've done." And he was like, "Cool." Probably doesn't even remember who I am. But anyway, I love his podcast. I love his book. I love everything about what he's doing, which is one of the reasons why I use both Placidus and Full Sign. And I started with Placidus. My mentor taught me Placidus. Placidus is the default setting for every astrology program.
Yeah.
Also, Placidus, the Book of Houses, was so much more accessible. As if you've listened to Chris Brennan's podcast, he did the whole history about why Placidus is so popular. But yeah, I mean, when I was studying for my own certification, you have to calculate, a chart by hand. So Placidus is the most accessible and easy to calculate from an actual book of houses. And so I really came from that background of learning Placidus, learning, this is just kind of like, if you were a modern astrologer, you use Placidus. And then, of course, as my world expanded, I started meeting other evolutionary astrologers, and I met some, and then I met Vedic astrologers who don't even, use a circular chart. So it's this huge world. And I love that there's so many different house classifications. And the idea of whole sign houses is wonderful because it's so much easier to explain to people when they look at their own chart. Because if you show someone with a Placidus chart, they're like, why is my third house encapsulating 3 signs? And why, at what point what does that mean? And it's so much more complex when you're trying to describe what that house means to somebody. So the actual whole sign house system is so much just more succinct. And the answers you get when you do, divinational questions, like I use whole sign houses for horary, and it's so much more, the answers are so much clearer when you ask a specific question. So I think using whole sign is a much more refined system to get these specific answers that you're looking for versus the other house systems, which are a little bit more complex, and you have to dig into the houses a little bit more to find out what the nuances are and find out exactly, why it's so personal just for you, depending on where you were born. I mean, depending on the location of your birth, it's going to change. Those houses are going to be bigger, they're going to be smaller. And so yeah, I mean, basically I got to know my own chart through Placidus, and I liked, and it resonated with what I felt. And then I switched it over to whole sign, and I was like, whoa. I have a very angular chart. So there were a lot of planets that flipped to another house. So I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. So I'm kind of in this interesting limbo period between, do I really want to focus on whole sign or do I want to stick with Placidus? Because I think it works for me mentally. It works for me in some instances, and some I still stick with Placidus. So.
But I think that's the awesome part of this, is that there are so many houses, and I know so many astrologers who use all different house systems, and all of them are amazing astrologers. And so I think there's room for picking and choosing when to use Porphyry, when to use whole sign, when to use, Placidus. That's what I love about astrology, is that you can explore all those and decide what works best for you and when.
And so from my understanding, I know, Hana, when you're saying with horary astrology, and so just for anybody who doesn't know, horary astrology is kind of the art form of divination where you ask a question and you look at the sky. At that time, you ask the real question, the intentional question, the question behind the question to get your answer. And so using whole sign houses for divination, or even for forecasting, like, does anybody here write sign-based forecasts and horoscopes?
I do.
Okay, so Johanna and Hana and Sara, you both do. For me, like I write cosmic weather. I write kind of just like the bizcast, but I cannot stand forecasting because my Gemini, with all of like the details, how do you pick and choose? So maybe if I used whole sign houses, I could get better than that. But I don't like telling people, like, giving a broad, for me personally, I can't give a broad forecast for like one sign because I'm like, that can't be true for everyone. So I'll write general, and that's again, our own personal nature is coming into and filtering the way that we're looking at astrology. So I think that's so beautiful. So the consensus is all of them work. And I also personally, just to add into that story, I use Placidus, and I had a client who is also like really well-versed in astrology. And she's like, well, I use whole sign astrology. And she had this like crazy stellium in Libra in her 7th house. And when it's in whole sign, then her stellium kind of spreads apart and there's no interceptions and everything's in the 8th house. And it made her very, very happy. It just kind of like settled and made her at peace. And I was like, I don't know, I think you're hiding from something here, like by not wanting to look at the Placidus with her intercepted 7th house stellium. And when we started to analyze like that, the relationships and everything, she's like, ew. And so maybe there's this idea of using quadrant or the more wonky house systems where we get these interceptions, where we find our hidden truths and things. Maybe that's really much a better tool for self-inquiry, for self-amplification, realization, those kinds of things. And then when we're doing more forecasting and weather, then maybe using whole sign houses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you might want to add about just kind of your personal process, and if you're choosing, or anything that you want people to know about house systems?
No, this is definitely a big topic, and one that gets hotly debated in astrology communities.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting about the debates. Like I love, like, I'm not a debater. Like, I feel like as this Gemini rising, I just see all of like, okay, well, that works for you. Like, go for it, use it. Like, why is anybody saying that anybody else is wrong? That's where I get into the issue.
I feel the same way. My Gemini's in Mercury, my Mercury's in Gemini, and I'm like, hey, whatever works for you. That's why I said I love that there are so many options out there that we can explore what works and resonates for us personally. I don't see what the problem is, but there are like people get really angry sometimes if you don't like their house system.
Yeah. So for anybody listening, if they want to look at their chart, and you can change the house systems on like astro.com, and even on different mobile sites, you can change your house systems, and you can see where planets might change, may or may not change. Like, maybe I stick to Placidus because I learned it in Placidus, and my chart is pretty pretty balanced so that when I change the house systems, they all stay the same, like nothing changes. Wow. And so I'm like, I can't gain any further insight as to what resonates with me. So I guess it's Placidus as the default.
Well, it's interesting because, I love playing around with all of them, and I totally recommend everybody do the same. And just notice your reaction when you see your planets shifting, because, or you see your houses like changing, widening and closing, because when I looked at, I think it was Campanus, Campanus, and I was like, oh my God, why is my 12th house so huge? Like, I don't want to, nobody wants a 12th house that big. Come on. So like sort of check yourself and be like, okay, what is that? What's the shadow coming up in me?
Are you resisting your soul's growth, Hana?
So I love to use it. It's like almost a psychological tool, really, to like play at the house systems and see what it does to you mentally, and then just let it sit. I mean, I sat with whole sign for a while before I was like kind of accepting it a little bit and being like, okay, well, I can see how this really works too. But gosh, I have just Jupiter. I have Jupiter right on the descendant, and it's like, it's either going to be in the 6th or the 7th. So that's a big shift. That's a big, difference in the explanation and the delineation. But I love all of the ancient techniques that are associated with whole sign houses. I use a lot of ancient techniques, but I also use modern planets. So there's this struggle, I think, between astrologers. If you use modern planets, they didn't use those during Hellenistic times. They didn't use those during whole sign houses times. And then are you like allowed to use the two different traditions? So I think we're all in this process of evolution with astrology and seeing how we can integrate the ancient techniques into modern astrology and really honor that where it came from, the history. And then, let's just go from there. I mean, we're discovering new planets and new asteroids and new bodies out there all the time. So,
And then the modern planets, just to clarify, those are any planet beyond Saturn, because I think the ancient astrologers could only use the planets that they could visibly see without modern technology. So, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, those were out of the equation. How simple things might have been back then, but far from it. I think Jessica Lanyado, she uses Campanus house system. Do you guys know Jessica Lanyado?
Yes, I was listening to her podcast and she was explaining she loves the fact that it creates huge houses. And I'm like, I hate it. So everybody feels something different about that house system they use.
I had the pleasure of reading just very recently a person who was born in Reykjavik in Iceland. And when I looked at it in both whole sign houses, I was like, okay, we're going to have to look at this in whole sign as well as Placidus, because she had like 3 houses with the same sign on it. It was really interesting. And her midheaven in Placidus, or in whole sign houses, all the way in the 12th house, midheaven in the 12th house.
Wow.
It was so crazy.
Yeah, we have it really far north and far south.
Yes.
Birthplaces. It really skews the whole house system. So, I mean,
yes,
it's just interesting to see how people resonate with that. And
Sara, do you have you use multiple house systems too, right? You use whole sign houses for a lot of things, but you use other house systems as well, right?
Yeah. So a lot of times with client work, I'll use Placidus, or at least I'll start with Placidus and see how that's resonating with them, just because usually it's the default for most like astrological systems. So it's the one they may have already seen. And so I usually start there. And then if they're like, this isn't resonating, then I will like, okay, let's try looking at with whole sign houses. And I definitely use whole sign houses when I'm doing any kind of forecasting or horoscopes. That's when I use whole sign houses. And it's really funny because for me, I don't have a lot of things that change between the two. There's I think there's like 4 things that change, but they're pretty big things. Like my Pluto moves from my 12th to my 1st house.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah.
That is big.
Yeah. So in Placidus, Pluto is in my 12th house, and then a whole sign, it's in my first house. Jupiter just kind of, it waltzes from my 3rd house into my 4th house. So it's little things like that there were a few that when I first saw them, I was like, that can't be right. My North Node moved into my 7th house, and I was like, I don't know if I like that.
Whenever there's the resistance, that's the one like, oh, well, I better get real with that.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so fun to kind of explore like all the different lenses and ways you can look at your birth chart, is because you get to notice when that resistance comes up. And that resistance is a key. I mean, that's telling you something. Mm-hmm. So it's important to kind of, challenge yourself and push yourself and just, see what comes up for you as your birth chart shifts and what you're like, I don't like that about it, and follow that. That's a breadcrumb to follow to discover more about who you are.
Beautiful. I can just see, I love the visual of Jupiter waltzing in from the 3rd house to the 4th house. And I love the visual of how Pluto must be so happy, like pointing out at your resistance and just kind of poking holes there, going, hold on, Sara, regardless if it's in the 12th or the 1st house.
Yes, exactly.
I did have one last thing to add. So, for example, if you do not know your birth time at all, like that is just like you just can't get your birth time, explore your chart in equal houses, because that will just put Aries as the rising, and all of your planets by sign will just be in their kind of domicile houses, and that'll kind of give you an interesting way to look at things. It's always, I still like looking at equal houses anyway, just to kind of take a look. But so again, whole sign houses, to set the dial right and the prescription right, you need to know your time and place of birth to get your rising sign correct. So, well, beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today to talk about the houses. How can people find you and work with you? Let's start with Sara.
So you can find me. My website is belladeluna.com, and then Facebook and Instagram both are Bella de Luna Astrology.
Beautiful. And do you have any offers that are coming up soon that people might be able to take advantage of?
Not super soon. This is kind of I'm slowing down this summer.
Yay.
But this fall, the 2022 Soul Care Planner will come out, as well as the Soul Care Oracle deck. So I'm really excited about that.
I love that. Wonderful. And Jill, how can people find you, work with you, and if you have any offers coming out?
You can find me at soulsparkhg.com. And on Facebook, my group is called Empath Balanced and Thriving. And I'm always doing Reiki classes, as well as I offer group coaching sessions, as well as one-on-one sessions. So check my website out for what's coming up there.
Well, thank you, Jill. And Hana, how can people connect and find you and work with you?
Well, my website is Orbital Astrology, and you can find my hula hoop shop on Etsy at Orbital Astrology. I'm on Twitter at Orbital Astrology, Instagram, Orbital Astrology, and I do a Facebook group that we talk about. I do like a weekly, energy, planetary weather, weekly weather type thing. I also do, where's the moon, what the moon phases are going through. And we also do a new moon circle every month. That's totally free. So if you want to look me up on Facebook and join our group, it is Astrology and Hula Hooping.
Have fun.
The only group that's Astrology and Hula Hooping on Facebook. So and I also run a monthly membership service that you can try out for 30 days for free. You get monthly horoscopes, you get a monthly lunation and astro ingress calendar. And I also do a little workshop about astro flow and what astro flow means and how you can bring astro flow into your life. It's just a different thing every month. So yeah, if you want to check that out, it's at orbitalastrology.com.
Beautiful. Well, thank you everyone again for spending your time and sharing your star wisdom with us. This was fun. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you, Leslie. This has been great.
Thank you again. I really appreciate everybody. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple iTunes.